Hey, it's ShadowACS again. I've talked a lot about Sword Art Online on this show. And don't worry, for this video, I'm not going to get into the controversy surrounding it. I've already gone on about that at great length and have made pretty clear what my stance on it is. Instead, I want to talk about something I haven't before, and that's the amount of Sword Art Online knockoffs that have come out. Well, okay, maybe knockoffs is too mean a word, but nevertheless. Ever since Sword Art catapulted to popularity in 2012, there's been a whole host of anime based around virtual reality video games that are more than what they seem. And yes, I know .hack did the idea a decade earlier, but Sword Art was the show that really made it mainstream and popular. It's practically its own anime genre now. There's Log Horizon, which I still haven't seen, but I know also got a lot of attention. And even Ready Player One, the recent Hollywood movie, also fits into this same mold, which I am aware is based on a book that came out shortly before Sword Art, but it's still interesting how all these things are coming out around the same time period. And the one I'm going to be talking about today is another big hit in this genre of anime called Overlord. The funny thing about Overlord is, it almost doesn't even need to be an RPG anime. It feels like with a little bit of tweaking, they could have easily made this a straight-up fantasy. I almost kind of wonder if they were originally intending to do that, but then the popularity of shows like Sword Art exploded and they decided they wanted to do something similar. But that's just me peddling a conspiracy theory. How's the actual show? People may disagree with me on this, but in my opinion, Overlord is the perfect definition of a guilty pleasure. Don't get me wrong, I loved watching this anime, but let's be honest here, it's really fucking stupid. There is no doubt in any second you're watching it that this is just intending to be a pure power fantasy for teenagers. The characters are pretty simplistic, and it's not even really trying to have an intriguing, in-depth story. But at the same time, god damn it if it isn't fun as hell to watch. Even though I was constantly rolling my eyes, I still left every episode excited to see the next one. It just has a quality about it that makes it really, really addictive. So what's the show actually about? The story begins in a virtual reality RPG called Yggdrasil, which used to be really popular, but now is finally about to be shut down. Our main lead plays the character of an undead king who used to be one of the most powerful players in the game, and is naturally pretty bummed out about the whole situation. Sentimental, he decides to stay up playing the game up until the very last second the servers are online. Except that when they're shut down, the game doesn't actually stop. Instead, it becomes more real than ever. All the NPCs who had previously been stationary suddenly come to life and start chatting like real people. And our main character finds he can no longer log out of the game and is now and permanently a powerful undead being. In typical fantasy anime fashion, and this is starting to become a cliche that's bothering me a little bit, our main character just kinda says, fuck it, I hated the real world anyway, and decides to conquer this one. Yeah, I was okay with this in No Game No Life and ReZero, but now it's just starting to feel like lazy writing. Like, remember how in Familiar of Zero, how Saito's decision to return to the real world was such a big part of his character development? That's how you do this sort of thing. Anyway, our main character also decides to change his name to the Supreme Overlord Ainzul Gon. And goddamn it if that isn't the coolest fucking name I've ever heard in my life. And speaking of characters that all have awesome names, he's also joined by a team of powerful guardians who are each almost as strong as he is. There's a demon woman named Albedo who's fanatically in love with him, an insect warrior named Cocytus, a calculating intellectual demon named Demiurge, a pair of twin dark elves named Aura and Mare, and a vampire named Shaltir Bloodfallen, who's also madly in love with Lord Ainz. Together they vow to learn about this new world and conquer it one story arc at a time. So like I said, I'm not even really sure that this anime even needed to be based around an RPG game. Not that it necessarily hurts the show, but it plays such a small part in the story that you almost don't notice. To begin with, the fantasy world the show takes place in isn't even the one from the Yggdrasil game. Apparently, after the game server shut down, Lord Ainz, his fortress, and all the NPCs in it all got transported to a totally new fantasy world. Which is a change I'm actually in favor of, because it means Lord Ainz actually has to take time to learn about the world he's found himself in. And in the process, it can be explained to the audience as well without it feeling forced. If the whole thing took place in Yggdrasil, I think I'd kind of be left wondering why he couldn't just conquer the world right away, given his extensive knowledge of the game. And there's also things like how we never even find out the name of the human playing Lord Ainz. Once in a while he'll have an inner monologue where he basically talks to the audience in the voice of an ordinary teenager, but even those are pretty sparse. When I think of his character, I pretty much just picture him as the powerful undead Lich King. I know that's kind of just supposed to be an act the teenager playing him is putting on to intimidate and impress his followers, but it's such an entertaining act, I kind of want to believe in it. I mean, how often do you see a main character in anime who's an undead king who can shoot black holes out of his hands? On that note, this would probably be a good time to bring up the most common criticism people seem to have about Overlord. And that's that Lord Ainz is way too overpowered. And to that I say, well, yeah, no shit. To me, that's kind of the point of the show. It's supposed to make you want to imagine yourself as this invincible conquering king in a fantasy world, with all these followers who are absolutely devoted to you and enemies who don't stand a chance against your awesome power. I know this because that was kind of my anime fantasy when I was 13 or 14 years old. Hey, don't judge. And Overlord does manage to tap into that fantasy really well. Now with that said, do I think this is technically a really smart, well-put-together show with great gripping characters and storytelling? Not really. If someone came out of this saying the main character was just too overpowered and that it totally ruined the tension in all the action scenes, I would totally get where they were coming from. I think for me this anime does what, say, Princess Diaries does for little girls who fantasize about wearing pretty dresses. No, it's clearly not a masterpiece, but it's just kinda there to be a fun little fantasy for its target audience. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a lot of fun watching this. I love watching Lord Ainz's evil laughter as he looks into the despair on his enemies' faces as it dawns on them that they have no chance to defeat him. And every time an episode ended, I was always excited to see the next one. I also friggin' love the Guardians in this show. These guys are practically the highlight of the anime. They're all so different and fun and have such colorful designs and personalities. They have such great interactions off each other, like Albedo and Shaltier's insane fighting over who gets to be Lord Ainz's wife. It also kind of reminds me of the 13 squad captains from Bleach, in that you have this group of colorful characters who are all built up as being awesomely powerful, but you don't really know why at first. So you're constantly looking forward to seeing them in action throughout the whole show. Every time one of these guys was on screen, I just loved it. And it also doesn't hurt that, at least in the English version, they got a terrific voice cast to dub these characters. I especially love the actress voicing Albedo. Her name's Elizabeth Maxwell, and she just owns this role.
You lowered my form! No! That's my love! My beloved Lord Ainz! You caused him pain, and for that you will know hell!
I think with most other actresses, this could have been a terrible, annoying character. The way she's constantly fawning over Lord Ainz and obsessing over him. But the performance just makes her seem so delightfully insane, it's hard not to have fun with it. Plus, I didn't know she was Winter and Ruby. Yeah, I just found that out randomly while looking through her IMDb page. That's friggin' awesome. There's also a fair amount of comedy in this show, which is kinda hit and miss. While the characters are incredibly entertaining, I can't think of any scenes that really made me laugh. But I also don't remember being especially annoyed at the comedy either, with one exception. There's one scene where Lord Ainz tries to fondle Albedo to make sure this isn't still an RPG game where he couldn't do that sort of thing. It's a horrible scene, and it is absolutely cringeworthy to watch. When this happened, it was only the first episode, so I was thinking, oh man, I'm in trouble now. Is this really the anime I'm gonna get? Thankfully, they don't do anything nearly this painful again. I also want to talk for a little bit about the recent second season, which I've heard mixed opinions about, and to be fair, I can see why. The season is split in half between two totally unrelated story arcs where Lord Ainz isn't even really the focus. That is to say, he plays a major role in both of them, and they both fit into the main storyline about him conquering the world. But the main characters actually seem to be the humans in the world who cross paths with him, and this race of lizard people which one of the stories is focused on. On one hand, I could see how this would upset some people, as it isn't really the same as the show we got in Season 1. But here's the thing. If they had continued what they did with the first season and just had Lord Ainz go around defeating enemies who didn't stand a chance against him, it would have gotten old. Hell, it was starting to get boring even toward the end of the first season. As much as I enjoy the whole power fantasy aspect of the show, you need characters that have some vulnerability if you're going to keep the audience interested for long periods of time. Part of what you need to keep an audience engaged is getting invested in a character fighting and struggling to achieve their goal. I actually kind of like the idea better of having Lord Ainz be sort of a background character, and having his story be kind of a canvas to paint all these other characters' stories on. On the whole though, is Overlord a super smart and engaging anime that I would recommend to everyone? No, not really. But it does have a clear target audience, and if you're in that group, it's tremendously fun to watch. I think the anime I've seen that Overlord is most similar to is probably No Game No Life, which is also about an awesome kick-ass main character trying to conquer a fantasy world. If you're a fan of that show, you'll probably enjoy Overlord. Although between the two shows, I would say No Game No Life is the better anime. The game strategy is a lot more interesting, and the comedy is a lot funnier. But to me, they both kind of fit into the same category of guilty pleasures, where the whole fun is just watching a main character be awesome. I think Overlord is definitely worth at least a viewing, so check it out and see if this is the kind of anime you can get into. This is ShadowACS, and I'll see you next time.